To return to something I mentioned we were going to talk about earlier in terms of protesting, let's get into it, because earlier this month, a man phoned BBC Radio Bristol to say he'd been trying to visit his ill father in hospital, but was held up because of a blockade by the environmental group Extinction Rebellion. Before the man could get to hospital, his father died. The group's tactics may be controversial, and hundreds of protesters are facing charges after taking part in those demonstrations I'm sure you'll remember in April. But there is no doubt that they have been effective in getting the subject of climate change on the agenda and putting pressure, crucially, on the government to act. 5 Live's Jim Taylor went to one of their non-violent direct action training sessions in Liverpool.
It's a Thursday evening and about 50 people have come along to this 4-hour session in a community centre basement. Some of them are long-term activists, but many of them had never been involved in anything like this before Extinction Rebellion came along. The tactics they're discussing might not be violent, but they are, in some cases, illegal. Obstruction of a highway, for example, is a criminal offence. Now, sessions like this are taking place in many cities across the country as the group plans further action to draw attention to the damage being done by climate change.
This is brilliant. This is so exciting. So many people. So welcome. Extinction Rebellion really sort of sprung into action following last year in October, the International Panel for Climate Change. The political response has been, oh yes, there's an emergency, yes we will allow fracking to go ahead. Oh yes, there's an emergency, yes we will have a third runway at Heathrow. They pay lip service, but they don't do anything about it. So Extinction Rebellion has grown out of a need for people to make the politicians listen.
Using direct action gets way more media attention than, say, petitions do. So trying to use that to start national conversation about the ecological and climate crisis that we're facing.
I've heard a lot of, why is it always in London? Why is it always in London? Well, one of the aims of Extinction Rebellion is to hit where it hurts. There's no point in doing these actions if it's just for us to have a good time.
My name's Kate. My mum's the original eco-warrior. Always had it instilled in me, always going on about the environment, and you come across people in your life and they go, you're not one of them, are you? You're not one of them, are you? And I thought with this XR, it's given me an avenue to sort of not shout from the rooftops, just be able to be passionate.
We're basically going to give you a scenario and you're going to say how violent you think that is.
So if you think that kicking down a door and storming the stage at a conference is violent, or very, very violent, go up to there. If you think it's not at all violent, you go there. And if you say it's somewhere in the middle, go somewhere in the middle.
It's always perceived as being violent when you break down doors. And violence isn't just about physical contact, it's also about fear.
Shutting down the tube by stopping the tube doors from closing for as long as possible.
We were stopped from doing it because people might get trapped underground, and that is pretty grave.
Is that where you're saying that within the rebels there was a decision not to do that action
because people get trapped underground?
I would have said yeah until obviously April, and they did do it, and it surprised me. Even my nan wasn't even bothered about it.
So you're going to stop people getting to work in their workplace. So is that a violent act or not a violent act? So you're blocking their entrance to work.
What if that person's work is in a hospital?
There is always somebody that's on a shift and you're taking over that shift, so you're not leaving the public or the person sick in the bed without nursing care.
So hopefully that's allowed you to see how varied everyone's views in this room are. So you can imagine how wide and varied people's views outside of this room are when you do an action. People are going to take it very differently to how you intended for it to be taken.
I've been sort of supporting XR in spirit and sometimes in person, and I wanted to make sure that I came along and knew the XR stuff so that you don't end up doing the wrong thing on an action. People's values are different, so some people define violence as very much like bodily injury. For me, I feel like I don't want to make anyone feel afraid or upset or hurt even, really. And
do you think you've got the country on your side?
Some of it, definitely. I don't know if XR has the country on Extinction Rebellion's side, but I think that the country is increasingly on the side of radical action on climate change.
So when police ask you for your name, details, etc., on a day you can just no comment them. If they're trying to get information out of you of like how many people are you expecting, which direction are you going, what route are you taking, you can just shut them down with no comment. And as soon as you start using no comment, police will usually go and try and bother someone else because they know you're just going to keep using no comment. There's a bit of an uncertainty with the kind of charge you're likely to get. Especially as Extinction Rebellion stuff ramps up, it's likely that the state might try and put heavier charges on people to stop people joining. So things like Stansted 15, getting the big terrorism charge for things that have previously got aggravated trespass. Obviously, if you plead not guilty, which is kind of the current XL strategy, it's essentially an extension of the action, so you're blocking up more court dates. Instead of complying with what they want you to do, you're essentially, like, again, being civilly, like, doing civil disobedience by not complying with them. I guess be aware that if you're going on an action, nothing is non-arrestable, so don't go thinking, oh, I'm definitely not going to be arrested.
Okay, Darren, what brings you here tonight?
I guess in the past I've been trying to do certain things like maybe like zero waste, like you're not using plastic, and a lot of those things felt to me a little bit worthless in the grand scheme of things. That it might make a small amount of difference, but really didn't seem to be making much. So I think it was the first time I really saw where you could make a difference.
And how does it make you feel hearing it in such detail about what you can expect to happen and also what could happen to you if you go out there and take part?
I suppose naively, actually coming in, I had this impression maybe that people are going to be arrested, maybe you just be released without charge. So actually hearing some of the things tonight probably maybe slightly less confident about like just steaming into something.
Do you think you would be willing to get arrested, knowing that you could be charged, that you could be fined, you could end up with a criminal record?
Yes, yeah. I think, maybe I'm in a slightly privileged position in that I'm self-employed, which is maybe giving me a bit...
No one's going to sack you?
No, so maybe that's giving me a bit more confidence. But I can certainly see how, if I was employed, I would be thinking about this maybe in a different way.
What's your name?
Tash.
And where are you from, Tash? What do you do?
I'm from Liverpool and I'm a PhD student. I've been very impressed with how the movement's organised. It's sort of been developed by academics and they know their stuff, they know what they're talking about, so it's all really well planned, which has impressed me enough to sort of get active for the first time in my life. From my perspective, it's quite a personal choice whether to get arrested or not, and you don't have to make that choice until the day and depending what the action is. So for me personally, I wouldn't want to get arrested in Liverpool because I don't want to deplete the resources that Liverpool has, but getting arrested in the capital is a completely different question.
Does it have implications, or could it have implications for your career, your future?
Absolutely, but the main thing that has implications for my future is the planet exploding. So, for example, learning more about what's happening has made me make the decision that I don't want to have kids at the moment because I don't think it would be fair to bring life into the world right now unless there was big, significant political changes. So, to me, that's a bigger sacrifice than getting arrested once. I mean, I'm not in a position where I'm about to pop one out, but that's something that's been on my mind, that the world is not a place to bring new life into right now because of the instability that we're looking at. You know, there's such a risk of food shortages in the real near future. We've already sort of started to see that a little bit. The way I understand it is that if the public's talking about it, then you've won. So whether it's...
Even if they don't like you?
Absolutely, I don't really care if the public likes me or not.
After a break, the group is divided into two. Half the people here play the part of protesters, the other half take on the role of drivers or police. The volunteers are learning how to handle themselves when their protest gets heated.
My mum's in that car there. She's on oxygen. She can't breathe.
Yeah, and I've got to get with my daughter to the hospital.
What are you doing? Just sitting here.
Playing her?
We're only going to be here for 7 minutes. We're trying to get the government to take...
I quite like asking them an open question that'll just disarm them, that they're not expecting. So he's wanted to pick up his son, and I was just like, how old's your son? What's his name? Does he like the planet? What's his favourite animal?
If you are rigid, it's much easier to pick you up. If you are floppy and you just literally just don't give it, it is much more difficult, and that's what we're going to practice.
Here we go. Come on then. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right, here we are.
Oh, God, I'll get into the...
Right, okay.
It's like a dead weight.
People have been like kind of super gluing themselves to each other like glue chains, or like locking on. So like just kind of putting yourself in like a metal tube, which then police have to go cut through before they can remove you. So I glued myself to a road for one of mine, But basically, the police were really like worried that I was going to get injured in them arresting me. So they essentially like formed like a protective barrier, like a barrier of police around me, while they were trying to unglue me. So super glue is definitely not one for everyone, but it takes like police a lot longer because they have to go get a specialist team out. Same with like lock-ons. The more effective your movement is, the more likely it is to have police infiltration because you're being effective. So the best way to not have that is just to not be effective. But we don't really want to do that. So
the more police infiltrators, the better.
Well, there's a conversation there that you have with your kids, maybe not now, maybe in a few years' time, where I guess you want them to go up to uphold the law and to respect authority to an extent.
You know, I'm not a long-time activist. I've never done anything like this, so I generally have always been on the right side of the law. But I think, your point is right. Like, I think there's some things, if you genuinely believe that it's wrong and that nothing's being done, then I think with your conscience you can be happy. And I think my view now would be in the future, this will be looked at that, we did the right thing.
We've got an action coming up at the end of August.
If you do go out there and you get arrested and you get charged, will you consider yourself a criminal?
No, not at all. I'm fighting for the planet. What's so criminal about that? What the actual companies and the way people are treating this planet, that's criminal in my eyes. So yeah, lock me up.
5 Live's Jim Taylor speaking to Extinction Rebellion volunteers in Liverpool during training. I'm joined now in the studio by Clare Farrell, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion and one of the editors of This Is Not a Drill, the organisation's newly released handbook, which we'll come on to in a moment. But take us back, Clare. You were there at the start. How do you reflect on how Extinction Rebellion has developed? Good morning.
Morning. Well, I'm still amazed, and I think because it's all happened so quickly, it's for some of us not really sunk in kind of how much it's grown and how quickly it's expanded, because I still very vividly remember turning up to a demonstration and thinking, I hope more than 20 people come, and being genuinely worried that they wouldn't. So it does seem to have sort of expanded at a kind of incredible pace, which I think has been quite hard for us all to take in, especially whilst we've been so busy.
What is the level of support? Do you have a number on it? Any idea of how many people there are now on a database? Or
the numbers are quite hard to get hold of. But recently I've seen a document that somebody's made internally that says there's 120 plus groups in the UK.
So that's like local organisation.
And that's over 100,000 people in our UK membership, I think, and something like about 58 or 59 countries.
And what is your background and what do you work as?
My background's in sustainability and fashion. I've worked commercially and I've worked in the kind of ethical sector, and I've been educating in that for about 10 years.
So you teach, that's your line of work
so I'm
when you're not protesting.
And product development as well and design work.
OK, and in the sense of I asked that because I think people who've been drawn to this are from all sorts of backgrounds, which has also made it quite interesting and quite diverse. You could hear the types of people who were coming along to that session in Liverpool, which Jim went along to. Have you got any understanding of why this campaign seems to have taken off in a way where others haven't? What do you think it is?
I think it has a lot to do with the amount of research that people did previously to the launch. There was already a network called Rising Up, which was a decentralised kind of network of activists who were trying out different ideas around civil disobedience, non-violent direct action, but in that context of civil disobedience more than you might see outside a specific site, like blocking a fracking site, for example. A lot of those actions tend to be sort of seen in a different type of way to spraying a bit of chalk paint on the front of a bank, for example, for a bit of sort of spectacle in a town centre. It's a lot sort of lower entry point in terms of your skill and experience in taking direct action. So I think there's something about the simplicity of it and the fact that it's different. It's in a different space. We're saying do it in the city. And the mobilisation strategy around giving talks and inviting people on trainings and looking at the sort of rapid mobilisation that happened in the Bernie Sanders campaign, for example. There's lots and lots of research that's happened.
When you're deciding what to do you take into account whether or not it might affect your support from the public?
Yeah, so we have had, you might know, massive debate around this Heathrow proposal that some people said they wanted to fly some drones close to Heathrow Airport
to disrupt air travel,
in order to make them close the airport for the day.
Just as everyone's going on holiday.
Well,
that would make you popular.
Lots and lots of people felt very strongly about that. And so the debate has gone on and on for actually, I think, probably about 2 months. And now there's been a final statement from XR saying, OK, we won't endorse this action. And if people go ahead and take the action because some people are very keen on the design of it, then it won't be Extinction Rebellion. It will be independent people who are going to potentially go off and do it by themselves. So that won't be anything to do with XR. And that's been a decision because so many people felt a sort of strong emotional response to the proposal.
But those people, I mean, get me into the mindset of that, because those people who want to go, and I now accept, obviously, you've made that decision, so it won't be, and I'm sure you hope, because you've made that decision, it will be adhered to. But who are these people who want to try and shut down airports? Because that is the fastest way to isolate yourself in many ways, because people are flying for work. Sometimes they're flying because they've got a family member they need to see. You know, they're not all on a jolly. And even if they are, they work hard. Why can't they fly?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because everybody I've spoken to about flying has a really big emotional response to it. And I find it quite surprising. You know, when the BBC did a piece about it, didn't they? When the volcano erupted and nobody could fly for several days, or was it a week or something? Literally nothing happened. Like almost nothing happened. That, you know, and if you're only interested in the economy, GDP didn't drop. We didn't see the economies sort of start to fail. So we know that we could be flying much, much less. And we know that we don't pay what flying costs. It's massively subsidised by the government. And we know that expanding the airport at Heathrow at a time like now is, I mean, when I campaigned on it on Hunger Strike, we described it as a crime against humanity to vote in favour of the expansion of Heathrow Airport. It is. We cannot afford to do that right now. So I completely understand the feelings of these people. It's an act of conscience that they're trying to put themselves in a position to do something.
But the style of protest, I mean, there's one thing about, you know, individuals, but putting drones out there, especially when there's a complete unknown, if you like, about drones, and there's been fear about drones and terrorism, there's been concerns about security because of that, you know, and also anything around airports is terrifying for people.
Yeah, and we understand that, but I also kind of understand where the people are coming from
who are those
feeling
people
that they want to take that action.
Who want to do it? You've obviously spoken.
Yeah, I know some of them. Most of them are Christians and Quakers. They're religious people, a lot of them. They're spiritual people.
That's interesting. I didn't know if you would be able to define them in a group like that. You can.
A lot of them are. There's not all of them, but and I think.
And did none of them fly? They have taken that as a proper sort of hard line in their lives.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Do you still take flights?
No, because the last time I caught a plane, I was reading about climate change and I was crying, and then I said to myself, I can't.
When was the last time?
Do this anymore? It was about 2 years ago.
So you haven't taken.
So I was quite a late person to cut flights. I work with lots of people who haven't flown for years and years, but ultimately, personal decision not to catch a plane doesn't mean the plane doesn't take off, and it doesn't change the aviation industry. So,
but you personally feel passionate about it, and I'm obviously talking to you right now.
I can't. I just felt too compromised. I'm heartbroken. The situation that we're in is horrible.
Do you think something like that, though, is something you can live by? You know, just actually putting it into practice, because many people won't want to, won't try, or can't, because perhaps they have family living in Australia, or they have people who've taken a decision in their life to not live in the UK anymore.
Yeah, I've spoken to quite a lot of people who have family far away who can have a very rational conversation about the fact that they feel they shouldn't have such a high carbon footprint by taking long-haul flights or taking any flights. I've spoken to other people who need to fly a lot less. They're just talking about taking a holiday, and they have this huge kind of emotional outpouring response. You can't tell me what to do. What will this do to my life? And I've thought about it from my position. I've hardly got any money. I can't travel if I can't take a cheap flight to somewhere far away, because the train is often 6 times the price, you know, and that's an injustice in of itself, you know.
But you obviously, you're someone who feels deeply, you feel very passionately about this cause that you're talking about being certainly in the expansion of Heathrow, a crime against humanity. Yet at the same time, how does it make you feel on a human level when, and you know, it's something that was publicised across the BBC, albeit it came into BBC Radio Bristol. But how do you feel when someone is in that situation where they couldn't get to see their father, who then passed away because of your protesters?
Well, I think we all feel horrendous about that. You know, there's no question. That's absolutely, that's not an intended outcome of what we're doing. But I think people, I hope, can understand that we feel this is an absolutely last. It's the last attempt to try and do something to change this. We're very close to going over tipping points. I expect. Which we can't come back from, and which mean that...
It's just that guy can't come back from this. And I know it's very difficult to make things personal when things are large, so I take the point, but I don't know how you put those together, really, and they sit well together, because they can't.
Well, they don't sit well together, do they? It's really painful. I mean, feeling so compromised, feeling that you're in a system which is so violent. I mean, the violence that people talk about in that non-violent direct action training, the violence that's enacted on a population like the people of London, where 10,000 people die prematurely every year because they breathe really, really toxic air, and where children are harmed before they're born by the quality of the air, and where we know that we expect mass food shortages and mass displacement of people within people's lifetimes who are born today, and that will lead to war, and sea level rise will cause countries to disappear. You know, you're talking about the suffering, really long suffering of billions of people around the world that is being forced forwards further and further by aggressive kind of business that, like the expansion of Heathrow Airport and making terrible political decisions around the climate.
I mean, Boris Johnson famously said he'd lie down before that expansion.
I know, we were wondering if we'd get to chain ourselves together with him.
Right.
I doubt that's going to happen.
Well, he's busy in Scotland today, we hear, but you may be able to talk. A message just came in, and it's not necessarily that the topic is actually that divisive in this country, which is very different, of course, to America. It's your tactics. That's what's very divisive, isn't it? And that's what you're talking to there, which is how do those two things sit together? Jan says, I pledged to stop all flights this year or ever again. No more, just not worth it. It's too expensive for the planet. It'll be a challenge and I will meet it. If you care about your children, then stop killing their world, as I say, from Jan. But another message here, why do you not put to these people, and you are representing, that this is a democracy and they're putting themselves above the law? If they think their point of view is valid, they can test it at the ballot box. What would you say to that?
Well, I think everybody knows that there's no way to, for example, prevent the expansion of Heathrow Airport through the ballot box, because we campaigned at the Labour Party to ask them not to vote for it. And the party policy was to vote against, and more of them voted for it than voted against it, in the name of the economy. So there isn't really a way to beat this stuff at the ballot box, I would say. And also, you know, there is a virtue to disobedience that has won new human rights all over the world, all throughout human history. The women in the UK wouldn't have the vote if there wasn't civil disobedience. The civil rights movement in America, black people wouldn't be able to vote. India wouldn't have got its independence. You know, and you've got to look at these things and say, you know, it's a question of the law, but it's also a question of non-violence and morality, and being able to see that, like, our species is on a massive suicide mission, basically.
I mean, Moz has messaged in, the environmental protesters are spoon-fed middle-class people with no thought for others, like the man who couldn't see his father in hospital. But Moz may support your actual cause. That's the issue, isn't it? So what would you say to somebody like Moz?
I would say I'm really, really sorry that you don't like our tactics, and I really hope that we won't have to do them for very long and that we can see some actual change. You know, we're still losing biodiversity, we're still putting carbon emissions up. They'll go up again this year. So they haven't even flatlined. We haven't even stopped going up to bring them down. So, you know, we really are on a sort of rapid course towards a very unpleasant future on this planet.
Is it against Extinction Rebellion policy to tell us what's next? in your civil disobedience?
Well, I have to say, because we're decentralised, I don't always know everything.
Right.
But I can tell you that we'll be going out in October. On October the 7th, people will be hitting the streets in London again. I'm not quite sure what that'll look like yet.
Okay, but no drones at Heathrow. That's not on
from
the
us,
agenda.
no.
Right. Well, we've got a bit of an insight into the workings of the group, which of course caused and keep causing major headlines and polarising a lot of you out there, not necessarily, as I say, about the cause, but about the tactics. So very interesting to get that insight. Thank you very much to Clare Farrell. Good to have you on. And as you say, one of the editors of This Is Not a Drill, which is Extinction Rebellion's newly released handbook. Many messages coming in with regards to hearing a little bit about the mindset of Extinction Rebellion and those at the sort of top, although they probably don't have a hierarchy, I'll get that wrong, of that organisation, of that network of groups. Hello, Emma. I was a member of the Picket Outside South Africa House in the late 80s. Our tactics were very similar to XR, and I and many of the Picket were arrested through that time. We were there for 1,494 days, organised in shifts across the weeks. We enacted many acts of civil disobedience across the years, all to highlight political prisoners in South Africa and the plight of the non-white majority. If you can't get things done through legitimate means, sometimes it takes disobedience to win through. That's Simon. Good morning. Good luck to the Extinction Rebellion people. The most important issue we face today, shutting down an airport, is a consequence of required action. It will upset some people, but not as many if global warming realises its full horrific potential. I've just been to Northumberland and had a wonderful holiday. There are alternatives. Stephen, listening in Lancaster, hello to you. Tony says, by blocking the main roads from South Leeds into the city centre recently, Extinction Rebellion protesters caused delays and cancellations for many young, middle-aged and elderly patients who had appointments at the Leeds Trust hospitals. Life-changing operations and outpatient appointments were missed. Results of biopsies were delayed. Urgent drugs and blood transfusions could not get there on time, and ambulances were delayed. All the time that was happening, cars, buses, vans and lorries, many of them diesel, were crawling around Leeds, pumping hundreds of times more green gases into our air and into our children's lungs. We know that there are issues with climate change. We know we need to make changes, but these idiots are going about it in entirely the wrong way. If anyone dies because they can't get to the hospital treatment that they need this week, you know, these lunatics will have blood on their hands. Why are you giving these boneheads airtime? Another blunt text reads, they cause disruption and are a waste of police time. You are divided, not necessarily, as I say, on the cause, but on the tactics of Extinction Rebellion. 85058, who are planning in earnest more action with regards to climate change.